Have you ever been to jail before? Actually, you guys don't have to answer that. But let me tell you, it is not something that Jack and I had ever experienced before coming to medical school. We're both fourth-year medical students, both from small towns. And honestly, we both have had the privilege of not having family members or friends who have ever been incarcerated. Volunteering at a jail is not like the safety of our classroom. For example, there are the rules, and there's a lot of them that you have to remember. No necklaces, no hoodies. Those are all strangulation hazards. No phones, no smartwatches, or anything you would consider valuable. You even had to get all of your pens checked because those pens could have springs inside and could potentially be taken out and used as a weapon. Every single piece of paper that you brought in needed to be accounted for when you left. When you first step into the jail, there are these heavy metal set of doors that swing on open, and you're led down this dimly lit hallway. The air feels like it's almost suffocating. You get to this elevator, and there's a couple buttons on the side you can't even push to control. Everything is controlled by eyes in the sky, watching your every move and guiding you through the jail. You get to this room surrounded by cells, and it's exactly how you would imagine it to be. It's sterile, concrete, and outside you hear a correctional officer shout, "Hey, we got some medical students here. If anybody has any questions about their health, you can go on in." Slowly, a couple people dressed in bright orange jumpsuits make their way into our room and sit in a half circle on some plastic chairs. You come face to face with strangers that you've never met before.
As a first-year medical student, it can feel like your brain is being force-fed through a fire hose. I mean, you're learning about the 12 cranial nerves, the branches of the carotid artery, the blood clotting cascade. To be honest, some of us have to relearn this stuff over and over again. And you quickly realize that in the real world of medicine, you are impressively useless. I'm serious. You have this avalanche of information that you're building in your head, but you can't actually do anything. You can't and shouldn't care for patients yet. You can't write prescriptions. It can feel like you basically have to hunker down, learn all this stuff, and then you can talk to a sick person. In theory, not such a bad idea. But in practice, it can make all the information that you're learning feel ungrounded. It's not connected to the one thing that got us all into this in the first place, the patient. Then a first-year bioethics course. The ones that AJ and I took were about incarceration health. In them, we learned that people in prisons and jails have staggeringly higher rates of diseases like high blood pressure, high blood sugar, and infections. We learned that while the US has about 5% of the world's population, we have about 20% of the world's incarcerated population. And we learned that most people who are in jail aren't even legally guilty. About 70% have not been convicted of a crime yet, and many are simply there because they're awaiting trial and can't afford bail. So a fire gets lit. We're learning about these massive systemic injustices in these classes, and then a moment later, we're back in the library feeling totally powerless to actually do anything about it. So we joined a medical student interest group. This group went into a jail once a week, not to provide medical advice, of course we're not allowed to do that, but just to talk, to provide basic medical education. Why is smoking bad for you? What even is blood pressure? And AJ and I thought, okay, we can't be doctors yet, but we can do that. We can talk. But the satisfaction that we thought that we'd get from participating in these health education talks was quickly replaced by situations that stoked that fire further. For example, we met a gentleman with a known disorder of his brain and spinal cord. To keep him functional, he needed regular injections. But security lockdowns happen, transportation gets canceled, healthcare appointments are missed. In fact, we came to learn that about 68% of healthcare appointments from jails across the country are missed. So we saw, without his injections, week after week, he got weaker. He went from walking to using a walker to being in a wheelchair. We were watching a preventable decline happen in real time. You know, he was scared, he was frustrated, and we felt totally powerless to do anything to actually help him. And you know, this is just one example. Worsening eyesight from glaucoma because people can't get their eye drops. Fainting episodes from low blood sugar. Worsening of mental health conditions like PTSD, anxiety, and depression, partially because people can't get their medications. The list goes on and on. This is not a critique of staff inside of prisons and jails, though. They are generally very good people trying their absolute best in a system where care isn't and has never been the primary objective. The primary objective is security, and care can feel like a distant second.
Simultaneously, we were learning about the world outside the jail. Here in Rochester, a city with a robust medical system, it can take as long as a year, if not much longer, to find a new primary care doctor. So imagine, you're released, you're getting the clothes that you came in with, maybe a short course of your medications, and you have all these fires in your life that you're trying to put out. Where am I gonna live? How am I gonna pay for gas? What am I gonna eat? And a lot of times it's your health that gets put on the back burner. You might have complex medical needs, but you don't have a doctor and you don't have trust. During our experiences, we've been told by so many people, I don't trust doctors. And we've come to learn, why would they? From their perspective, the medical system has only ever failed them. They've been in and out of our overcrowded emergency rooms, dismissed and discharged, told to follow up with a doctor that they don't have. They've been in jails and prisons where they've told us all of their complaints are treated with vitamin I or ibuprofen. We've come to learn that doctors can be seen as an extension of the system that locked them up in the first place. We've heard their stories and we knew that within a couple weeks or months, they'd be released and fall off a cliff. And that cliff is real. In the 2 weeks post-incarceration, there is a 12 times higher mortality rate compared to the average person. We knew that talking wasn't enough, and although we might just be students, we had to try and do something more.
So we tried to build a bridge over that cliff. Working with other medical students and mentors, we came up with an idea to start a student-run free clinic specifically for people coming home from incarceration. It sounded crazy. I mean, from our perspective, we had no money, no power, no real authority, but we did have this anger born from our experiences. So we wrote a proposal, we pitched it to faculty, to deans, other medical students, honestly, anyone who would listen to us. And we found real doctors already engaged in this work in the community who believed in our mission and agreed to supervise us for free. We reached out to a local reentry organization who donated office space and staff, and with a small grant for supplies, we built it. The idea was simple. We meet people on the inside, in the jail during those health education talks. We sit with them, we listen and talk to them, and we build that first fragile thread of trust. And then we tell them, when you get out, we'll be there. Here's our address, please come see us. And you know what? They do. A week, a month, 6 months later, they come into the clinic and the first thing that they see is us. Hopefully a familiar face. You know, we like to call it, we stealing some lingo from the hospital, a warm handoff. We're not just acting, we're not giving them a pamphlet, we're trying to act as a bridge, right? So in that first visit, we sit and listen to their story, we do a basic health exam, and we schedule their first visit with a permanent primary care doctor at a reentry clinic within 2 weeks. It's a first step. And you know, this model works. We were inspired by similar clinics where early connection to primary care is paired with access to vital basic services like finding housing, food, and employment. And interventions like this have been shown to decrease emergency department use by this group by up to 50%, as well as decrease the risk of reincarceration for technical violations.
The patient is the primary mission, but something else happened. We thought that we were creating this clinic to provide a service, but we actually created an education. We thought that we were the teachers, but it was our patients that were teaching us. We learned how to listen. I mean, really listen. Not the doctor listening where you're waiting for the patient to stop talking so you could come up with the right diagnosis in your head, but listening to understand a human being. We learned to stop trying to fix everything in those moments, to just start witnessing. We learned to second guess every preconceived judgment that we form. For example, in medicine, we do this thing called chart review, where before meeting a patient, we scan their medical record to get some context to provide to guide their care. This process is essential for coming up with a diagnosis and triaging, but as you can imagine, it's particularly vulnerable to bias. In fact, research shows that when there are terms in the chart that have a negative connotation, like substance abuse or incarcerated, that can affect our expectations before we walk into the room. But when you care for people with these lived experiences, it becomes very clear that the chart can never fully capture the person behind it. It's not only just their medical history, but recognizing and acknowledging the environment, the social realities, the pressures that they face on a day-to-day basis. Everything is interconnected to come and tell their story.
And we learned about something called trauma-informed care, not as a buzzword from lecture, but as a necessity to care for your patient. You know, when you approach care with this perspective, it forces you to ask simple questions about yourself. For example, when I walk into an exam room, what's my default? I used to walk in, stand by the computer, read through the chart. We've all been to a doctor's office. Now I try to stop and ask myself, where am I standing? Am I blocking the only exit to the room? We came to learn that for someone who's been locked in a cell, while that act seems innocent to a lot of us, it can be perceived as a threat. And you realize this doesn't just make you a better doctor when you take care of this one group of people. It makes you a better doctor for everybody. The patient with anxiety who's afraid of feeling trapped. The elderly patient who wants to be seen as a person and not a cluster of diseases. The lessons we learned here, that is the core of medicine. And other medical students feel the same way that we do because they feel what we felt. They're not useless junior medical students, they're listeners, they're advocates, and they're learning that the most important part of medicine isn't memorizing the intricacies of the 12 cranial nerves and the carotid artery. Don't get me wrong, that stuff's important, but you can look it up in a textbook, trust me. The most important part of medicine, the foundation for your career as a healer, is to be able to see and honor the humanity that's sitting right in front of you.
Our essential message is this. Caring for the people society has forgotten is not just charity. It's the most essential education a healer can receive. Our healthcare system is full of gaps, full of intimidating doors and arbitrary rules, and people falling through the cracks. Our challenge to you is this. 1, find the gaps. Find the people not being seen in your community, who is being ignored, and who could use your voice.
2, don't wait until you're an expert to help. And don't wait for permission to help. Your presence is sometimes more powerful than your expertise, and all you have to do is to show up, be a friendly, familiar face, and listen.
And 3, be willing to be intimidated. Be willing to walk through heavy metal doors or get your pens checked for springs. Because we went into the jail feeling useless, wanting to make a difference, but intimidated by the system, and we came out as better doctors.